Good morning, everyone. We are here to provide you with an update on the status of the case of Joseph Louis Miller. And to get us started and to provide an overview, we'll call Chief Thomas Carter. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. As Ms. Davis said, we're here to give you an overview on the arrest of Mr. Miller. He is back in his Commonwealth. He has been housed at a Dauphin County prison. But before I start, I want to introduce Mr. Marsico from the DA's office. To my right, Mr. Chardo, First Assistant DA. Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal James Comfort on the end right there. Senior Supervisor Special Agent from the FBI, Canedo, Mr. Arden Canedo. And to my left, Detective Gibney from Harrisburg City, FBI Task Force, Captain Derek Moody, CID, and Detective Chris Crocus. As you know, with the joint effort of all agencies that I just named, Mr. Miller, he was arrested down in Texas, and to lay the groundwork, I'm going to call on DA Marsico to fill us in.
Thanks, Chief. As Chief said, Joseph Miller is, as of last night, housed in Dauphin County Prison after a 30-year exile from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where he led a life of deception, attempting to avoid prosecution for the murder of Thomas Waller here in the city of Harrisburg. Mr. Miller, as most of you know, at the time of that murder of Mr. Waller, was on parole. We're joined today by the chairman of the Pennsylvania Board of Probation and Parole, Mike Pottinger, who will discuss his current parole status. But he was on parole for a murder from 1959, for which he was serving time when the Governor Schaefer, in early 1971, commuted his sentence, releasing him from that sentence. Since we've learned of Mr. Miller's whereabouts in Texas, which came as a result of great police work. I mean, there's just no other way to look at this case. You know, after 30-some years to catch a guy, many states away, we have to give credit to a variety of agencies that are represented here today. Here locally, the Harrisburg Police Department, under the leadership of Chief Carter, was constantly looking for Mr. Miller, looking for any place he might be. It wasn't a case that sat on a shelf. They worked very closely in that regard with the United States Marshals Service. With the Marshals Service, you can run for so long, but you can't hide forever. And the Marshals Service, both here locally, where we always have a great relationship with them and partner with them in different task forces, different efforts, they, with their counterparts in Texas, did great work in locating, observing Mr. Miller, and ultimately taking him into custody in a safe manner. And I'll let the marshals talk a little bit more about apprehending him and taking him into custody. But this was great teamwork, the Board of Probation and Parole, the FBI. Where are we now? Can we prosecute a decades-old murder case? The simple answer is yes. The detective in this case from the Harrisburg Police Department is retired, but still around. Mr. Charter's spoken to him. He remembers the case well. There will certainly be some logistical headaches in locating some witnesses that might not be around for various reasons, some 30 years later. But from a police and prosecution perspective, we have what we need to get started and to get ready to prosecute Mr. Miller for this crime. As of today, of course, he is presumed innocent up until he is proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in the Court of Common Pleas on those charges. With that said, I'm going to turn it over at this point to Mike Pottinger from the Board of Probation and Parole.
Thank you, Mr. Marsko. I just wanted to give an update on the status of Mr. Miller's parole status. In 1959, he was charged with murder and sentenced to life. In 1971, his sentence was commuted and to a lifetime of parole supervision after that. He was on parole from 1971 up until 1981 when the alleged murder occurred. At that time, he absconded from supervision, and we issued a warrant for his arrest. And over the last decade or so, we have been trying to do our due diligence on the location of Mr. Miller, and we move forward working with the U.S. Marshal Fugitive Task Force, where we have agents assigned specifically locating fugitives from the State Board of Probation and Parole. And that collaborative and partnership amongst all the law enforcement agencies led to the capture of Mr. Miller in Texas. So on behalf of the Board of Probation and Parole, I just want to thank all the agencies that were involved in this case for the great work that they did and the teamwork as we move forward in that process. Where we go now with Mr. Miller in his revocation process, since he is in Dauphin County Prison now, we will be processing his case like any other case, and we will be waiting for the disposition of the new charges that are currently out with Dauphin County with Mr. Marsko's office. So we will wait to see the disposition of those charges before we take our next proceedings from there. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Comfort from the U.S. Marshal's office to go further. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. On behalf of the United States Marshal Service, I'd like to just make these following comments that we're in business in the Fugitive Task Force realm to work with our partner agencies at the federal, state, county, and local level, and through a team concept of joint efforts, melding together resources and investigative skill sets from all the different men and women that work on our Fugitive Task Force here in Harrisburg. We were able to develop different strategies with different angles of thought, and through deliberate analysis of the entire file on Mr. Miller, going back to 1959, knowing full well that fugitives do leave a trail, that they are creatures of habit, that they have patterns. You develop tendencies and strategies which then led us to focus somewhere in the Southwest United States. So it's important just to, I think today's a hallmark day to recognize these agencies that are with me here, that they had the faith and confidence of each other to come together to present this case for consideration for adoption by the Marshal Service's Fugitive Task Force, and then through a deliberate process, we've able to take Joseph Miller into custody. That's important for a variety of reasons. It's not a matter of if we catch fugitives, it's a matter of when. And when you have that mindset, you ultimately will bring closure to victims' families when you have murders. And that's very important in this case, because for 33 years, even though it's just an allegation at this point, there's a victim's family that has been crying out for justice. And it's because of the collaborative efforts here that Mr. Miller's now in custody. Thank you.
I just want to say that I forgot to introduce my good friend, Mike Pottinger back there. Without his help, this would not be possible. Again, I just want to thank the efforts of everybody here, especially the DA's office, because they give us a legal opinion and advice and tell us, what we have and who we can go after. Anyway, we're gonna take questions right now. So, any questions?
Chief. In 1959, he was sentenced to life in prison. Can you give us a little bit more insight on why he was even let out? Is this a breakdown in the system?
Now, back in those days, life in prison ultimately ended up with sentences served. I forget the average in the 60s and 70s was I think somewhere in the 14 years was the average life sentence back then. So I don't know that it was somewhat routine for an individual to have their life sentence commuted back in those days. That changed obviously dramatically in the 70s, 80s. Now we've passed a constitutional amendment that provides there has to be a unanimous recommendation by the Board of Pardons before a life sentence can be commuted. So a lot's changed, but back then that was not all that uncommon.
So it was common for murderers to be let out after, say,
14, 15 years was the average for a life sentence back then.
Yes.
So there was nothing unusual about his case that he was.
I mean, he would have been about 12 years.
any idea of what recidivism is for murderers that were let out after 15 years?
Well, like cases like this, usually there's cameras arraigned. When it happens in a certain governor's race in the 90s, it played a huge role, as most of you are too young to remember. But I don't know if you have any stats. I don't have any stats. Recidivism, no.
What,
The individual's name was Mr. Lumpkin, Johnny Lumpkin. I don't know the details. Shooting. Yeah.
When he was arrested, when the marshals did pick him up, I mean, did he have anything to say? I mean, what was he surprised? Was he rather shocked that he was tracked down after 33 years?
I think he was somewhat cooperative. He did not, fight, did not resist. But as to what he said, those statements will adduce court, in that regard.
And can you explain the process of how he becomes Joseph Miller to Roy Eubanks, even getting a license and Social Security and kind of changing his whole identity? Where was there a Roy Eubanks that he stole an identity from?
Yeah. It was a relative of his whose identity he assumed.
Okay.
Can you tell us what he was doing or his life in the last 30 years?
He was doing a variety of things.
He told me on the way home yesterday that he was a construction worker. He worked in several nursing homes as a cook throughout the years. But when he made it to Mineola, Texas, he did odd jobs. Everybody knew him around the town as a construction man, would do odd jobs for anybody that needed help.
And he can't give the address of his murdered by.
Roy Eubanks.
Can you explain his demeanor? Is he cocky that he got away with this for so long? Is he upset that he got caught? What's going through his mind?
Well, he's 78 or 79 years old. So he wasn't cocky at all. I mean, he was a gentleman yesterday on the way home. I think he was ready for it to be over. He said that he's lived so long as Roy Eubanks, he forgot who Joe Miller was. He said he left Joe Miller the day he left Harrisburg.
Thanks, everybody.
Just real.
What were the circumstances of how he escaped custody in 1950?
He was never in custody.
He was never in custody.
Yeah. Charges were filed, but he was never apprehended.
What was the date of the original murder, or the 81 murder, the exact date?
January 15th.
January 15th, okay.
And he was let out in 73?
He was let out in 71, 1971.
Okay, so just one more question. Do you have any reason to believe that he's involved in other crimes outside of this one?
No. Well,
We've been in touch with the authorities in Texas, and we're cooperating with them in their investigation of a murder in Texas.
So at least you suspect that he's involved in other crimes?
Well, the district attorney in Texas told me that he's conducting a full investigation. He's a suspect there.
Any other crimes here he may be involved in?
not here because we believe he left shortly after.
Which county in Texas is that?
You have that? Wood.
Could you tell us a little bit about any of the information that led you to finally track him down?
Unfortunately, I can't. So,
When's his next court date?
well, he'll have a preliminary hearing.
was at night court, so we have to wait for the issuing authority to ultimately receive the case to
Is
set
there, is there a certain DJ handling it?
We'll find that out.
Okay.
I would guess.
Yeah, the issuing authority in this case was the common police judge. It was Judge Lucid, who's now deceased. So we'll catch up with who's assigned.
Yeah, it'll have to be assigned someday. So we'll work on that.
Cool. Good job, fellas.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.